I posted a video where I talked about the craziness of Week 11, but in case you missed that video, I'll just quickly repeat it. Week 11 was probably the best weekend of the college football season. We had a number of upsets, we had a number of teams that were on upset watch, and the top 25 is really going to be shaken up this week. The AP poll dropped yesterday, the college football playoff rankings drop tomorrow, but today I'll be giving my top 25 after week 11 of the college football season. Before we get to today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are you love college football, and odds are you aren't subscribed to my channel, so make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. Staying at number 1 is Oregon, who took down Maryland 39-18. Now, despite winning by 21 points, this game never really felt all that out of reach. At the end of the first quarter, the Ducks led by only 7, and at the half, they led by only 11. Then, midway through the fourth quarter, the Ducks were still up by only 11 points, and Maryland was kinda hanging around in this game, but a couple scores late really put this one out of reach for the Ducks. Dylan Gabriel had 200 yards of total offense with 3 total touchdowns. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Ducks ran for 200 yards with a rushing score. It still is weird to me that we're this far into the season, and in my opinion, we truly don't have a team that is dominated from start to finish that is the obvious best team in the country. As of right now, Oregon is 10-0, they have a massive win over Ohio State, but they just don't seem like that number 1 team by the middle of November that we've had in years past, where this team should be the national championship favorite. I mean, you can make the case that that team is Ohio State, who took down Purdue 45-0. Will Howard threw for 260 yards with 3 passing touchdowns, while the Buckeyes ran for 200 yards as a team with 2 rushing scores. As of right now, I think Ohio State and Oregon are in a tier of their own. The only reason I have Oregon above Ohio State right now is because they did win the head-to-head. But if they were to play again, I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State wins by 10 plus points. I think these two teams have been the best so far in college football, and like I said, they're in a tier in their own, and after the number 2 spot, it really goes down a tier. I don't care if it's controversial, I don't care about the strength of schedule. I got Indiana at number 3 after their victory over Michigan this past weekend. The Hoosiers are now 10-0 on the season, and they're one of only a handful of undefeated teams remaining. Curtis Rourke threw for 200 yards and had 2 passing touchdowns. Indiana has had one of the best offenses in all of college football this season, and in a game in which they had essentially nothing going in the second half, they still managed to pull out the victory. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of upset people in the comments that are going to be saying, strength of schedule, their strength of schedule is so easy. Well, a lot of teams have easier schedules than Indiana, and if it was so easy to win all your games, more teams would be doing it. BYU was on upset watch, they needed a last-second field goal to pull off the victory, but they're also 9-0 on the season, and they're one of the better teams in all of college football this year. Now with BYU, you can actually make the case they should be ranked above Indiana because their strength of schedule has actually been more difficult. They have victories over SMU and Kansas State, 2 teams that the playoff committee has ranked inside the top 25, and 2 teams that could finish ranked inside the top 20 or so by the end of the year. I get it, the Cougars had a really close victory, but this BYU team is legit, and they have a really damn good resume. A lot of people were really upset last week when I had Texas ranked so low, but if you're one of those people in the comments that's arguing about strength of schedule, well, you can't really make the argument here with Texas because they haven't beaten anybody this year. But they had a dominating victory over Florida this weekend, and a lot of teams did lose, so we're going to move up Texas into the top 5. But like I talked about earlier with tiers, I just don't think Texas is in a tier where they should be considered the number 5 team in the country. Honestly, I would put them in maybe tier 2, potentially tier 3 among teams that are competing for a national championship. But I will give it to them, they looked really damn good this week. Quinn Ewers had one of the best games of his career as he threw for over 300 yards with 5 passing touchdowns. Meanwhile, on the ground, Jared Gibson ran for 100 yards with a rushing score. Again, Texas is worthy of being a top 10 team in the country, but who is their best victory up until this point? Vanderbilt, who they won by 3. I mean, sure, that's a decent win, I guess, but the only time they played a remotely good team was Georgia, and we all saw how that went. It's not hating, I just don't think there are any teams that are worthy of being ranked inside the top 5, so by default, I gotta have Texas at this spot, but do I believe they're the number 5 team in the country as of right now? I don't really know. Like I said, I think there's two really good teams. I think there are two undefeated teams that are really solid, and after that, I think there's a bunch of teams that are good, and Texas falls into that category. Another team that falls into that category is Penn State, who took down Washington 35-6. I mean, it was a great game offensively and a great game defensively for the Nittany Lions. Drew Aller threw for over 200 yards with a passing touchdown. Meanwhile, on the ground, Penn State ran for 260 yards with 4 rushing scores. They also held Washington's offense in check as they held them to less than 200 yards of total offense. For the most part, Penn State has looked really good in every game this season. Well, with the exception of one, when they played a really good opponent and they looked terrible. So again, they're the number 6 team in the country by default, but are we really convinced that they are that great of a team? Again, I'm not quite certain because so many teams in college football this season have just been pretty mid. Notre Dame continues to win as they dominated Florida State 52-3. Riley Leonard threw for over 200 yards with a passing touchdown. Meanwhile, as a team, the Irish ran for over 200 yards with 4 rushing scores. This isn't an impressive victory considering Florida State is now 1-9 on the season. That's disgusting. If it wasn't for that crazy loss to Northern Illinois in the second week of the season, we'd probably be talking about Notre Dame as the number 2 or number 3 team in all of college football. When you look at their resume, they have victories over Texas A&M and Louisville, 2 teams ranked inside the top 25. They also dominated Georgia Tech, a team that just knocked off Miami. So Notre Dame has the resume. In fact, looking back at this right now, I don't care about that loss in week 2. Notre Dame has looked really damn good for the last 2 months. I'm bumping them. I'm bumping Notre Dame all the way up to number 5, and we're going to push Penn State and Texas down a spot in my rankings. So I actually have Notre Dame ranked as my number 5 team. Before we get to the rest of my rankings, I'd like to share with you guys how you can make the college football season more exciting and even win some money. I've partnered with Underdog Fantasy to bring you this amazing deal. If you download the Underdog Fantasy app and use promo code Harris, they'll match your first deposit up to $1,000. That's right, they're giving you up to $1,000 of free money. You can choose your favorite players from every game and decide whether or not they'll go higher or lower than their projections. So to add a little extra excitement to every game and win some money, make sure to use promo code Harris for a 100% deposit match up to $1,000 at Underdog Fantasy. You guys can also sign up using the link in my description as well. Tennessee took down Mississippi State 33-14. Nico Iamaleava only had to throw the ball 13 times as he threw for just under 200 yards with 2 passing touchdowns on only 8 completions. Running back Dylan Sampson continues to be one of the top backs in the country as he ran for 150 yards with a rushing score. Tennessee is another really interesting team for me because if it wasn't for that loss to Arkansas, they'd be hovering around the 3-4 ranking. And they do have that victory against Alabama a couple weeks ago that's looking really good for their resume. But outside of that, I don't know, Tennessee for the most part, they just haven't really wowed me at any point this year other than that Alabama game. Again, there's all these teams ranked inside the top 10 that are deserving of being ranked there, but they just don't seem like championship caliber teams to me. Alabama had one of the biggest wins of the entire weekend as they took down number 15 LSU 42-13. As I talked about in yesterday's video, this was just a dominant effort on both sides of the ball. Jalen Milroe really boosted his Heisman campaign as he threw for 100 yards, but he ran for 200 yards and had 4 rushing scores. I mean, he's the reason Alabama dominated this game, and he's the reason that they're right back in the playoff discussion. Now, I said this in yesterday's video, but Alabama's performance on Saturday, that looked like a team that is championship caliber. That looked like a team that has what it takes to win it all. But for the Tide, they do have 2 losses this year, so again, I don't know what to make of this team. Boise State was quietly on upset watch in this game as they took down Nevada 28-21. I mean, entering the half, this game was actually tied, which is pretty remarkable considering Boise State was a 24-point favorite in this game. They scored early in the third quarter and added another touchdown in the fourth quarter, but again, they were never able to really put this one out of reach, and they kind of let Nevada hang around in this game. Ashton Jeanty had another great game as he ran for 200 yards with 3 rushing touchdowns. Boise State is still alive in the playoff discussion, but if they would have lost this weekend, man, their chances would have taken a massive hit. Probably the biggest upset though of the entire weekend goes to Ole Miss, who took down Georgia 28-10. Now the crazy thing is, Georgia was actually ahead 7-0 in this game, but they were outscored by the Rebels 28-3 the rest of the way. Jackson Dart threw for 200 yards with a passing touchdown while leading the team on the ground with 50 yards. It wasn't a great game offensively for Ole Miss, but the reason they won this game was because of their incredible defense. They held Georgia to only 240 245 yards of total offense, including only 60 yards on the ground, holding them to fewer than 2 yards per attempt. We know that Ole Miss has one of the best offenses in all of college football, but if they're able to have games like this from their defense, Ole Miss could make a potential run at the college football playoff. SMU was off this weekend, so here's where I got them ranked. I have Miami falling a lot because this loss to Georgia Tech was just inexcusable. They fell on the road, losing 28-23. Now, Cam Ward still had a fantastic game as he threw for 350 yards with 3 passing touchdowns. He did all he could, and he's not the reason that Miami lost this game. The reason the Hurricanes lost was because their defense was utterly pathetic. I mean, Georgia Tech didn't have a quarterback that could throw the ball. Haynes King had a bad shoulder and he threw the ball only 6 times. Meanwhile, backup quarterback Aaron Philo, he wasn't all that great. He completed only 5 of 10 passes. For the game, the Yellow Jackets ran the ball 48 times for 270 yards. They were averaging 6 yards a carry with 2 rushing scores. Oh, and they also lost their starting running back who had 80 yards through the first few minutes of the game. Miami knew that Georgia Tech was going to be running the ball essentially every time, and they still couldn't stop it. I mean, that's a flat out embarrassing performance when you have national championship aspirations. Miami still looks like they're in a good position to reach the ACC title game and potentially reach the college football playoff, but this game could potentially keep them out if things don't go their way the rest of the season. Speaking of embarrassing performances, Georgia got embarrassed on the road at Ole Miss, losing 28-10. Like I just talked about, they jumped out to a 7-0 lead, but they were held to only 3 points over the final 55 minutes of this game. I mean, how is that possible? I get Ole Miss is a good team, they have a good defense, but 3 points over the final 55 minutes? I guarantee my Arizona State Sun Devils, they would have scored more than 3 points over the final 55 minutes. Carson Beck was terrible once again as he threw for only 180 yards, he didn't have a passing touchdown, and he had another interception. Meanwhile, on the ground, Georgia couldn't get anything going as they ran the ball 33 times for only 59 yards. I mean, again, this was just an embarrassing performance on both sides of the ball, and just like that, Georgia's chances of reaching the college football playoff just got extremely difficult. Army moved to 9-0 on the season with their 14-3 victory over North Texas. This was an insane game from Army as they had the ball for 42 minutes in this game. Bryson Daly threw the ball only 4 times for only 15 yards, but the quarterback ran the ball 36 times for 150 yards with 2 rushing scores. I mean, just think about that for a second. 36 carries in one game. Absolutely incredible. Overall, Army ran the ball a combined 64 times for 300 yards and 2 rushing scores. With Army, again, I don't care who they've played, they're 9-0 on the season. Now, they are going to have a massive test in a couple weeks when we take on Notre Dame, but until then, they're still one of a handful of undefeated teams remaining in college football. Colorado continues to be one of the biggest surprises this season as they took down Texas Tech on the road 41-27. Now, early on, this game wasn't looking good for the Buffaloes as they actually trailed 13-0 at the end of the first quarter, but they outscored the Red Raiders 41-14 the rest of the way. Shedeur Sanders had another fantastic game, throwing for 300 yards with 3 passing touchdowns while also adding a touchdown on the ground as well. Travis Hunter continues to add to his Heisman campaign as he caught 9 passes for 99 yards and had a receiving touchdown. But the biggest takeaway for me was Colorado's defense. After a first quarter in which they allowed nearly 200 yards, it felt, they really shut things down the rest of the way, and Texas Tech couldn't get anything going through the final 3 quarters. I talked about this in my video yesterday, but Colorado is now in the driver's seat of reaching the Big 12 title game, and they're a legitimate playoff contender. It was an ugly first half for Clemson as they were actually trailing 7-0, but they outscored Virginia Tech 24-7 in the second half and picked up the 10-point victory. Cade Klubnik threw for over 200 yards and had 3 passing touchdowns. Meanwhile, on the ground, Phil Maffa ran for 130 yards. Don't look now, but because of Miami's loss this weekend, Clemson is now actually in second place in the ACC standings as they're 6-1 in conference play. If things go their way, Clemson could be playing for the ACC title game and they could be playing for a potential playoff bid. Washington State dominated Utah State, winning 49-28. John Mateer threw for nearly 200 yards and had 4 passing touchdowns while adding over 50 yards on the ground with a rushing score. Wayshawn Parker had himself quite the day as he ran for 150 yards on only 11 carries with 2 rushing touchdowns. It's been a great season for Washington State, who unfortunately isn't getting enough love considering the Pac-12 no longer exists, but they're 8-1 on the season and they've quietly been one of the better teams in all of college football this year. Unfortunately, because they only play in a conference that has 2 teams, they don't have a chance of getting an automatic bid, but they still have some very small chances of making a run at the college football playoff. Speaking of making a run at the college football playoff, Tulane dominated Temple, winning 52-6. Darian Mensah threw for over 250 yards and had 2 passing touchdowns. Meanwhile on the ground, Mekhi Hughes ran for 150 yards with 2 rushing scores. Overall as a team, the Green Wave ran for 330 yards and had 5 rushing touchdowns. After a slow start to the season, Tulane is now 8-2 and they're 6-0 in conference play, tied with Army as the 2 undefeated teams left in the American Conference. I've talked about this in previous videos over the last few weeks, but if Boise State were to fall off and drop a game or 2 and Tulane wins out and wins the American Conference, it could be the Green Wave that get an automatic bid at the college football playoff by winning their conference. Kansas State was off this weekend, so here's where I got them ranked. Louisville was also off this weekend, so here's where I got them ranked. It was a rough game for LSU as they were embarrassed at home, losing by 30 to Alabama. Garrett Nussmeier had a terrible game as he completed 27 of 42 passes for only 240 yards. He had a passing touchdown, but he also had 2 costly interceptions as well. For the most part, LSU's offense couldn't get anything going against this Alabama defense. I mean, it was a really ugly game from LSU from start to finish. After looking like they had a solid chance of reaching the SEC title game and getting a playoff berth, they've now dropped back-to-back games and their chances of reaching the college football playoff are completely shot. It's been about a month, but I got my Arizona State Sun Devils coming back into the top 25. They took down UCF this weekend 35-31. Now this was a massive win for the Sun Devils because they were without their running back Cam Skattebo, who's been one of the best running backs in all of college football this year. Luckily, quarterback Sam Leavitt has been fantastic for them. He threw for just under 200 yards and had 3 passing touchdowns. Don't look now, but my Sun Devils are quietly still alive in the playoff discussion. I know that seems pretty crazy, but they're 4-2 in conference play and they're tied for 3rd in the Big 12 conference standings. Not to mention, they still have Kansas State and BYU ahead on their schedule, 2 teams that are ranked ahead of them in the Big 12 standings. All I'm saying is, there's a crazy scenario where my Arizona State Sun Devils reach the Big 12 title game, win that game, and are playoff bound. Wrapping up today's video is Iowa State, who dropped their 2nd consecutive game, losing to Kansas 45-36. Quarterback Rocco Beck did all he could as he threw for nearly 400 yards and had 3 passing touchdowns. The issue was that Iowa State's defense couldn't stop Kansas at all. Jalen Daniels threw for 300 yards and had 2 passing touchdowns while adding 70 yards on the ground with a rushing score. Meanwhile, running back Devin Neal ran for 120 yards and had 2 rushing touchdowns. Just a couple of weeks ago, Iowa State was undefeated, they were ranked inside the top 10, and they were making a case at being one of the 4 automatic bids. Now, their chances of reaching the college football playoff are looking really slim. They are still 4-2 in conference play, so they still got that going for them. But they're going to have to win out, and they're going to have a lot of help from other teams in order to give them a shot at reaching the Big 12 title game. Well, that wraps it up for my top 25. Was there a team I had ranked way too high, or a team I had ranked way too low? Or was there a team I didn't even include inside this top 25? Whoever it is, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. I'm posting college football videos all season long, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, don't forget to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm, and it helps share this video and my channel with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.